At 03:20 hours on September 12, 1944, Private First Class Jake Lindsay crouched behind a disabled Sherman tank on the eastern edge of Recounts, France, watching German infantry mass in the tree line 400 yards away. He had one Browning .30 caliber machine gun, 400 rounds of ammunition, and no backup. His entire squad was dead. His platoon had retreated. His company had fallen back across the Moselle Ither 3 hours earlier. The Germans were coming for the bridge. Lindsay was 19 years old, from Kentucky. He had been in France for 23 days. He had been in combat for 11 hours. In that time, he had seen his squad leader killed by artillery, his assistant gunner shot through the chest, and 7 other soldiers from his platoon cut down during the German counterattack that had started at 1800 hours the previous evening. Now he was alone with his machine gun, positioned behind a knocked-out tank that provided cover from direct fire, watching approximately 250 German soldiers prepare to assault the only bridge still standing across the Moselle in this sector. If they took that bridge, they would cut off the entire 35th Infantry Division. The German force belonged to the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, veterans who had fought in Russia, Italy, and now France. They had launched their counterattack at dusk, hitting the exhausted American forces who had just finished crossing the Moselle after 3 days of continuous fighting. The Americans had not expected it. They had thought the Germans were retreating. They were wrong. The 35th Infantry Division had crossed the Moselle River on September 11th after breaking through German defensive positions west of Nancy. The crossing had been opposed. German artillery had shelled the bridgehead continuously. German snipers had killed American engineers working on the pontoon bridges. German machine gun positions on the east bank had fired on every boat that crossed. It had taken 18 hours to get the division across. By midnight on September 11th, the 35th Infantry Division had established positions 2 miles east of the river. They had captured Recounts, a small farming village with stone houses and narrow streets. They had pushed reconnaissance patrols another mile east. Division headquarters believed the Germans were withdrawing toward the Maginot Line fortifications. Intelligence reports indicated German units in the sector were at 40% strength, low on ammunition, and demoralized. The intelligence was partially correct. German units were under strength and low on ammunition. They were not demoralized. At 1800 hours on September 12th, the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division counterattacked with everything they had left. They hit from 3 directions simultaneously, infiltrating through the American forward positions in the fading light, bypassing strong points, moving fast. Their objective was Recounts and the bridge beyond it. If they took that bridge, they would cut off the entire 35th Infantry Division.
The German attack caught the 35th Division off balance. American units had just finished a forced march and river crossing. They were exhausted. Many had not eaten in 24 hours. Ammunition supplies were still being ferried across the river. Artillery support was limited because most of the guns were still on the west bank, waiting for bridges strong enough to carry their weight. The Germans exploited every weakness. They hit the American forward outposts with concentrated fire from MG-42 machine guns, suppressed them, bypassed them. They infiltrated between American positions, using the rolling terrain for cover. They moved in small groups, squad-size elements advancing under covering fire from other squads. It was textbook German infantry tactics, executed by soldiers who had survived 3 years of war because they were good at this. By 2100 hours, German forces had penetrated to the outskirts of Recounts. American units in the village were fighting house to house. Radio communications were sporadic. Company commanders did not know where all their platoons were. Platoon leaders did not know where their squads were. The situation was chaotic. Captain Robert Marsh commanded Charlie Company, 134th Infantry Regiment. Marsh was 28 years old, West Point class of 1938. He had landed in Normandy on June 7th, 1 day after D-Day. He had fought through the hedgerows, survived the German counterattack at Mortagne, participated in the liberation of Paris. He was competent, experienced, and careful. Careful commanders kept more soldiers alive. At 2100 hours, Marsh received orders from battalion headquarters to withdraw across the bridge. The battalion commander had decided Richecourt could not be held. German forces were too strong. American forces were too disorganized. The bridge had to be preserved. Charlie Company would cover the withdrawal, then fall back across the river. Engineers would blow the bridge once everyone was across. Marsh began pulling his platoons back systematically. First platoon withdrew from the northern edge of the village. Second platoon pulled back from the eastern houses. Third platoon held the southern approach. The withdrawal was orderly at first, then German pressure increased. At 2200 hours, German infantry stormed into Richecourt from 3 directions. They had realized the Americans were withdrawing. They pushed harder, trying to reach the bridge before the Americans could cross. Fighting intensified. American soldiers fired as they retreated, moving from house to house, covering each other. German soldiers followed, clearing rooms, throwing grenades, firing bursts from their MP-40 submachine guns. Jake Lindsay's squad had been holding a position on the eastern edge of the village. They were positioned in the stone house with clear fields of fire across the open ground toward the German assembly areas. Their mission was to slow the German advance, give the rest of the company time to withdraw. Lindsay had been assigned to the squad 3 days earlier. He was a replacement, sent forward to fill gaps from earlier casualties. The squad did not know him well. He did not know them well. His job was to feed ammunition to the assistant gunner who operated the Browning .30 caliber machine gun. The gun was their main weapon, the foundation of the squad's defensive capability. The Browning .30 caliber machine gun was the standard American infantry support weapon. It fired 400 to 500 rounds per minute, effective range 1,000 yards. Properly positioned with good fields of fire and adequate ammunition, one machine gun could stop an entire infantry assault. But it required a crew. The gunner aimed and fired. The assistant gunner loaded ammunition belts and helped correct aim. The ammunition bearer, Lindsay's job, carried extra ammunition and fed belts to the assistant gunner during sustained fire. When the German attack hit the squad's position at 22:45 hours, everything happened fast. German infantry came from 2 directions, using the darkness for concealment, moving quickly across open ground. The squad's machine gun opened fire at 200 yards. Germans went down. More kept coming. A German stick grenade landed in the house, exploded, killed the squad leader instantly. Shrapnel wounded 2 riflemen. The machine gun kept firing. More Germans crossed the field. They were close now, maybe 100 yards. The assistant gunner was firing in short bursts, conserving ammunition, picking targets. German return fire intensified. Bullets hit the stone walls, ricocheted inside the house. A rifleman was hit in the shoulder, screamed, fell. Another was shot through the head. The assistant gunner took a round through the chest, collapsed across the machine gun, blood pooling on the weapon. Lindsay did not remember making a decision. He remembered pulling the assistant gunner off the machine gun, seeing blood everywhere, grabbing the weapon, finding the trigger, firing. He had trained on the Browning during basic training, but had never fired one in combat. His job was ammunition bearer. He was not supposed to operate the gun, but everyone else was dead or wounded, and Germans were still coming. He fired a long burst across the approaching German line. Tracer rounds showed him where the bullets were going. He adjusted aim, fired again. Germans hit the ground, took cover behind a low stone wall 80 yards away. Lindsay fired at the wall, trying to suppress them, keep them pinned. Behind him, the remaining squad members were retreating. The wounded were being dragged out the back of the house. Someone was yelling for him to fall back. He looked back, saw them leaving, looked forward, saw Germans at the wall starting to move again. If they got across that open ground, they would reach the village, reach the bridge. He stayed. The next 5 hours were a blur of firing, reloading, adjusting position, firing again. Lindsay moved the machine gun 3 times, dragging it to different windows as German fire concentrated on his previous positions. The stone house protected him from rifle fire, but not from concentrated machine gun fire or grenades. He had to keep moving. German infantry tried to flank the house twice. Lindsay saw them moving through the darkness, shadowy figures trying to circle around to his rear. He shifted the machine gun, fired long bursts at the moving shapes. They went to ground. Some retreated, others stayed pinned behind whatever cover they had found. Ammunition became a problem around midnight. Lindsay had started with 8 ammunition boxes, 200 rounds each, 1,600 rounds total. He had fired more than half by 0100 hours. At his current rate of fire, he would run out before dawn. He started rationing, firing shorter bursts, choosing targets more carefully. German infantry probing forward, fire. Germans moving in groups, fire. Germans trying to flank, fire. Everyone else, hold fire. The Germans did not know they were facing one machine gun operated by one soldier. They acted as if facing a prepared defensive position with multiple weapons and supporting infantry. When Lindsay fired from the left window, they assumed a second machine gun was positioned there. When he moved to the right side of the house and fired from there, they assumed a third weapon. They advanced cautiously, probing for weaknesses, calling in fire support from their own mortars and machine guns. Around 0200 hours, a German mortar barrage hit the house. Shells exploded in the street, against the walls, on the roof. Stone fragments filled the air. Part of the second floor collapsed. Lindsay crouched in a corner, covered his head with his arms, waited for it to end. When the barrage lifted, he moved back to the window, set up the machine gun, waited. Germans would come during or immediately after a barrage. That was standard infantry tactics. Use indirect fire to suppress the defense, then assault while the defenders were still disorganized. They came. Maybe 30 soldiers running across the open ground in a loose line, covering 80 yards at a sprint. Lindsay let them close to 60 yards, then opened fire. The Browning chattered, spitting rounds across the German line. Men fell. Others dove for cover. Some made it to the stone wall. Lindsay shifted fire, raked the wall, forced them to stay down. One German soldier made it to within 30 yards of the house before Lindsay saw him. The soldier threw a grenade. It hit the wall beside Lindsay's window, bounced back outside, and exploded harmlessly. Lindsay aimed at the muzzle flash from the German's rifle, fired a burst, saw the figure go down. He was burning through ammunition faster than he could afford. 2 boxes left, 400 rounds. He had to make them last until dawn, or until relief arrived. No one had told him relief was coming, but someone had to come eventually. Charlie Company could not have abandoned the bridge completely. Someone would be organizing a counterattack, or at least sending forward observers to report German positions.
At 0245 hours, Lindsay heard American voices in the street behind the house. He almost shot at them before he realized they were friendly. 2 soldiers appeared at the back door, told him to fall back. The bridge was going to be blown. Everyone was withdrawing. Get out, now. Lindsay asked about the Germans in front of the house. The soldiers said artillery was being called in. Destroy the German assembly areas, cover the withdrawal, then blow the bridge. Lindsay needed to leave immediately. He refused. If he withdrew, German infantry would immediately occupy the house and advance to the bridge. They could reach it in 5 minutes, maybe less. If they reached the bridge before it was blown, they could stop the demolition, capture it intact. The entire 35th Division would be in danger. The 2 soldiers argued with him for 30 seconds, then left. They had their own orders. They could not stay. Lindsay listened to them run down the street toward the bridge, heard the sound of boots on cobblestones fading. He was completely alone now. At 0315 hours, he heard German voices in the darkness, quiet conversation maybe 100 yards away. They were organizing another assault, probably coordinating their movement. Lindsay checked his ammunition. 1.5 boxes left, 300 rounds. Not enough for a sustained defense. He would have to be selective, wait for massed targets. The German assault came at 0330 hours. This time they used smoke. Mortar rounds landed in front of the house, burst with white smoke that spread across the field. Lindsay could not see through it. He heard Germans shouting, heard movement, knew they were coming but could not see targets. He fired anyway, sweeping the machine gun back and forth across the area where he estimated they would be advancing. Blind, suppressive fire, hoping to slow them down. He fired one long burst, 40 rounds. Stopped, listened, heard screaming from the smoke. Someone was hit. He fired another burst, shorter this time, conserving ammunition. The smoke began clearing around 0345 hours. Lindsay saw Germans at the stone wall, more than before, maybe 40 soldiers spread along 80 yards of the wall. They were preparing to assault the house. He could see them checking weapons, fixing bayonets, receiving orders from their NCO. He had 200 rounds left. If they all came at once, he could not stop them. He did not have enough ammunition. They would reach the house, overwhelm him, take the position. He needed them to come in smaller groups. He needed them to make them cautious. He fired one burst at the wall, 10 rounds, aimed at the NCO who was giving orders. The NCO went down. The rest of the Germans dropped below the wall. He waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. They were not moving. Good. Caution was keeping them pinned. At 0400 hours, he heard explosions from the direction of the bridge. Multiple charges, big ones, demolition work. The engineers were blowing the bridge. He had held long enough. Mission accomplished. Now he just had to survive.
The Germans heard the explosions too. They knew what it meant. The bridge was gone. Their counterattack had failed. But the American soldier in the house was still there, still firing. They wanted him dead. The final assault came at 0415 hours. Germans came from 3 directions simultaneously, small groups moving fast, using fire and maneuver tactics. One group suppressed the house with machine gun fire, while another group advanced. When Lindsay shifted to engage the advancing group, the third group moved. They were coordinating well, using proper infantry tactics. Lindsay fought from 3 different windows, dragging the machine gun across the room, firing short bursts at each advancing group. He hit several Germans. The others went to ground. He was down to his last ammunition belt now, maybe 100 rounds. He loaded it, chambered a round, aimed at the closest group of Germans. They were 40 yards away. He fired. The Browning chattered. Germans fell. The bolt locked back. Empty. He had no more ammunition. Lindsay grabbed his M1 Garand rifle, moved away from the machine gun position, took cover behind an overturned table. If Germans breached the house, he would fight with the rifle. 8 rounds per clip, 5 clips left. 40 rounds total. Better than nothing. The Germans did not breach the house. At 0425 hours, American artillery began falling on the German positions. Heavy concentrations, 105 millimeter and 155 millimeter shells, landing in the fields around the house in the tree line where German forces had assembled. The barrage was systematic, pre-planned, designed to cover the bridge demolition and prevent German exploitation. Shells landed for 15 minutes straight. The house shook. Stone dust fell from the ceiling. Lindsay stayed in his corner, hands over his ears, waiting for it to end. When the barrage lifted at 0440 hours, he moved to the window, looked out. The field was empty. The Germans had withdrawn during the bombardment. Bodies lay near the stone wall, maybe 10 or 12. The rest had pulled back. Smoke and dust obscured the tree line. Lindsay could not see movement anywhere. He sat down, back against the wall, and waited for dawn. American patrols found him at 0630 hours. A reinforced platoon from Charlie Company sent forward to assess German positions and recover any wounded left behind during the withdrawal. They found Lindsay in the stone house, sitting beside the empty machine gun surrounded by spent brass casings. He was dehydrated, exhausted, and his hands were blistered from the hot machine gun barrel, but otherwise uninjured. The patrol leader, Lieutenant James Morrison, later wrote in his after-action report that Private Lindsay had single-handedly held a critical position against an estimated 250 German soldiers for over 5 hours, preventing German forces from reaching the bridge during the vulnerable period when it was being demolished. Morrison recommended Lindsay for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration. The official citation credited Lindsay with killing or wounding at least 40 German soldiers and preventing the enemy from capturing a strategically important bridge. He received the medal in October 1944 in a brief ceremony at division headquarters. General Patton pinned it on personally, shook Lindsay's hand, and asked him if he was scared during the fight. Lindsay said yes.
Patton said good. Soldiers who were not scared were either liars or idiots, and neither type lived long. What happened at Rushicourt was not unique in the larger context of World War II. Individual soldiers holding desperate positions against overwhelming odds occurred throughout the war. What made Lindsay's action significant was what it revealed about German tactical assumptions and American defensive capabilities under the worst possible circumstances. The German forces attacking Rushicourt were experienced combat veterans. They had fought on the Eastern Front, where Soviet defenses were often poorly coordinated. They had learned to exploit weaknesses, infiltrate defensive lines, and overrun isolated positions quickly. These tactics worked against disorganized defenses. They did not work against even a single well-positioned automatic weapon operated by a soldier who refused to retreat. One machine gun, properly employed, could generate enough firepower to give the impression of a larger defensive force. The Browning .30 caliber fired 400 to 500 rounds per minute. In 5 hours, Lindsay fired approximately 1,300 rounds. That averaged to about 4 to 5 rounds per minute, which sounds minimal, but those rounds were fired in concentrated bursts during critical moments, specifically when German forces massed for assaults or attempted to maneuver. From the German perspective, they faced what appeared to be a defended position with multiple weapons and unknown strength. They had no way to know they were fighting one soldier. When fire came from different windows, they assumed different weapons. When fire was accurate and well-timed, they assumed trained crews with good observation. They advanced cautiously because rushing a prepared position usually resulted in heavy casualties. This caution was learned behavior. German infantry in 1944 had learned that American defensive positions were typically well-equipped with automatic weapons and supported by excellent artillery. Reckless assaults against such positions were suicidal. The correct approach was careful reconnaissance, suppressive fire, flanking maneuvers, and overwhelming firepower when possible. The problem at Rushicourt was that German forces did not have overwhelming firepower. They were understrength and low on ammunition. They could not sustain prolonged firefights. They needed to take the bridge quickly before American forces could organize a proper defense or call in artillery support. But Lindsay's machine gun fire convinced them they faced a prepared defense, not an isolated soldier. So they advanced cautiously, probed for weaknesses, pulled back when they met resistance. That caution cost them the bridge.
American commanders studying the action afterward identified several lessons. First, even isolated defensive positions could be effective if properly positioned with good fields of fire. The stone house had given Lindsay protection from small arms fire while allowing him clear observation of German approach routes. The open ground in front of the house had no cover except the stone wall, forcing Germans to either assault across open ground or bypass the position entirely. Second, automatic weapons were force multipliers when ammunition was available. One machine gun with 1,300 rounds had generated enough firepower to stop multiple German assaults. The psychological effect of sustained automatic weapons fire was as important as the physical casualties inflicted. German infantry, hearing that distinctive Browning sound, learned to take cover immediately. Third, the willingness of individual soldiers to hold positions under desperate circumstances could affect outcomes far beyond their immediate tactical situation. Lindsay, holding the house for 5 hours, had protected the bridge demolition, prevented German forces from isolating the 35th Division, and ultimately contributed to the successful American advance toward the Maginot Line. But the most important lesson was about adaptation under pressure. Lindsay had been an ammunition bearer, not a machine gunner. His assigned role was to carry boxes and feed belts to the assistant gunner. When the assistant gunner was killed, Lindsay adapted. He took over the weapon, learned its operation under fire, and employed it effectively despite minimal training. That kind of adaptation happened thousands of times throughout the war, in every army at every level. Soldiers given tasks beyond their training found ways to accomplish them because the alternative was death or capture. The German failure at Richecourt was one small piece of a larger pattern in the autumn of 1944. German forces in France were conducting fighting withdrawals across multiple sectors, trying to slow American and Allied advances long enough to establish new defensive lines along the German border. These counterattacks were designed to disrupt Allied momentum, inflict casualties, and buy time for German forces to consolidate their defenses. Some counterattacks succeeded tactically, but failed strategically. German forces might retake ground temporarily, but they could not hold it against Allied material superiority. American artillery, once it identified German assembly areas, could deliver devastating firepower. American air superiority meant German movements during daylight were hazardous. American logistics meant lost equipment could be replaced quickly while German losses were permanent. The 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division's attack on Richecourt retook some ground, inflicted casualties on American forces, and briefly threatened the bridgehead, but it could not reach the bridge, could not cut off the American division, and ultimately withdrew with losses it could not replace. The division continued fighting through September and October, conducting delaying actions, falling back toward Germany. By November 1944, it was down to 30% strength and was pulled off the line for refitting.
The 35th Infantry Division continued its advance toward the Maginot Line. It participated in the Siege of Metz in October and November, fought through the German border fortifications in December, and eventually entered Germany in early 1945. The division's casualties from September through December 1944 totaled over 6,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. These casualties were replaced with fresh soldiers from training camps in the United States, maintaining the division's combat effectiveness. Jake Lindsay remained with Charlie Company through October 1944. He was wounded on November 3rd during the fighting around Metz when German artillery hit his position. Shrapnel wounds to his left leg and shoulder ended his combat service. He was evacuated to a field hospital, then to a general hospital in England, then back to the United States in January 1945. He never talked much about Richecourt. His family knew he had received the Distinguished Service Cross, but he did not discuss the circumstances. He told his younger brother once that holding the house had not felt heroic at the time. It had felt like necessity. Leaving meant Germans would take the bridge. Staying meant maybe they would not. So he stayed. That pragmatic assessment captured something essential about infantry combat. Soldiers made decisions based on immediate tactical realities, not abstract concepts of heroism. Lindsay stayed at the house because leaving seemed more dangerous than staying. The Germans were between him and the bridge. Running across open ground in darkness toward German-occupied territory seemed like suicide. Staying in the house with a machine gun and good cover seemed survivable. The decision was tactical, not moral. Historians examining the Richecourt action decades later sometimes describe it as an example of extraordinary courage. That description is not wrong, but it misses the context. Courage in combat often manifests as ordinary soldiers doing what they believe gives them the best chance of survival under impossible circumstances. Lindsay stayed because leaving seemed more dangerous than staying. The Germans were between him and the bridge. Running across open ground in darkness toward German-occupied territory seemed like suicide. Staying in the house with a machine gun and good cover seemed survivable. The decision was tactical, not moral. Historians examining the Richecourt action decades later sometimes describe it as an example of extraordinary courage. That description is not wrong, but it misses the context. Courage in combat often manifests as ordinary soldiers doing what they believe gives them the best chance of survival under impossible circumstances. Lindsay stayed because leaving seemed more dangerous than staying. The Germans were between him and the bridge. Running across open ground in darkness toward German-occupied territory seemed like suicide. Staying in the house with a machine gun and good cover seemed survivable.
The American Infantry Company in 1944 had 9 Browning 30 caliber machine guns, 3 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, and 9 60mm mortars. Plus, every rifleman carried an M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. The M1 Garand could fire 8 rounds as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger, reload in under 3 seconds, and fire 8 more rounds. One American infantry squad with 8 M1 Garands could generate more sustained firepower than a German infantry squad with 1 MG42 and 6 bolt-action rifles. When German forces encountered what they thought were company-sized American defensive positions, they were sometimes fighting platoons or squads. When they thought they were fighting platoons, they might be fighting squads. And at Richecourt, when they thought they were fighting a reinforced squad, they were fighting one soldier. This systematic overestimation of American strength affected German tactical decisions throughout the campaign. German units advanced more cautiously than circumstances warranted. They committed more forces to attacks than necessary. They called for more fire support than the situation required. All of this consumed time, resources, and combat power that German forces could not afford to waste in their deteriorating strategic position. The Americans understood this dynamic and exploited it. Defensive positions were designed to maximize firepower and give the impression of greater strength than actually present. Machine guns were positioned to cover multiple approach routes. Mortars were registered on likely enemy assembly areas. Artillery forward observers were positioned where they could see and call in fire quickly. When German forces attacked, they encountered dense firepower that seemed to come from larger forces than were actually present. At Richecourt, Lindsay inadvertently created this impression by himself. His machine gun fire from multiple windows suggested multiple weapons. His accurate fire suggested trained crews. His sustained fire suggested adequate ammunition supplies and supporting forces. German commanders, interpreting these indicators through their doctrinal understanding of American defensive tactics, concluded they faced a prepared position with unknown strength. They attacked cautiously and ultimately failed to take their objective before the bridge was demolished. The bridge demolition itself was significant beyond the immediate tactical situation. The Moselle River was a major obstacle in eastern France. Bridges across it were critical for military operations. Destroying the bridge at Richecourt forced German forces to find alternative crossing points if they wanted to continue their counterattack westward. It also secured the 35th Division's bridgehead, allowing American forces to build up strength on the east bank without fear of being cut off.
American engineers demolished the bridge using prepared charges at 0400 hours on September 13th. They had placed explosives on the bridge supports during the initial crossing, connected demolition wiring, and positioned the detonator at a safe distance. When the order came to blow the bridge, one engineer turned the detonator key. Multiple charges exploded simultaneously. The bridge's center span collapsed into the river. The structure was completely destroyed, rendering it unusable for vehicle traffic. German forces reaching the riverbank 20 minutes later found rubble and swift water. They could not cross without extensive engineering work. By the time they could organize a crossing operation, American forces on the east bank had been reinforced and artillery support was in position. The moment of vulnerability had passed. The recounts action illustrates the chaos of fluid combat operations. Plans broke down. Communications failed. Units became separated. In this chaos, individual soldiers made decisions that shaped outcomes. Most of these decisions were never recorded. Soldiers fought, held positions, retreated, or died without anyone outside their immediate unit knowing what they had done. Lindsay's action was recorded only because Lieutenant Morrison's patrol found him alive and Morrison took the time to write a detailed after-action report. If Lindsay had been killed during the final German assault, or if Morrison had not found him, or if Morrison had not written the report, the action would have been lost to history. The bridge would still have been demolished. The Germans would still have been stopped, but no one would have known one soldier had held off 250 Germans for 5 hours. Most soldiers who did extraordinary things in World War II were never recognized. Their actions were not witnessed by officers who could write citations, or they were killed before anyone could report what they had done. Or their actions occurred during chaotic fighting where no one could accurately assess what happened. The documented heroes represented a tiny fraction of the actual heroism that occurred. This raises questions about historical memory and military recognition. The soldiers we remember as heroes are often those whose actions were properly documented and witnessed, not necessarily those who did the most extraordinary things. Lindsay received the Distinguished Service Cross because Morrison wrote the report. How many soldiers did similar things but had no Morrison to document their actions? The military's medal system attempts to recognize extraordinary service, but inevitably misses most of it. Citations require witnesses, documentation, command approval, and often a degree of luck in having the right person see the right action at the right time. This means the historical record of military heroism is incomplete, probably capturing less than 10% of extraordinary actions.
Jake Lindsay survived the war. He returned to Kentucky in March 1945, worked construction for 35 years, raised 3 children, and died in 1989 at age 64. His Distinguished Service Cross is in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. His family donated it after his death, along with his discharge papers and a few photographs from the war. The stone house where he fought was destroyed in the 1960s when the French government widened the road through Recounts. No marker indicates where it stood. The field where German soldiers attacked is now part of a large farm growing wheat and corn. The stone wall where Germans took cover was removed decades ago. Nothing physical remains of the battlefield except the landscape itself, and even that has changed with modern agriculture. The demolished bridge was replaced in 1945 with a Bailey Bridge, then with a permanent concrete structure in 1952. Traffic crosses the Moselle at that point every day. Drivers do not know a battle was fought there or that a bridge was destroyed to stop a German counterattack. This is how military history fades. Battlefields become farms or towns or highways. Physical evidence disappears. Soldiers die. Memories fade. Eventually, only documents remain. After-action reports filed in archives, citations written 80 years ago, photographs of young men who are all dead now. But the lessons remain relevant. Properly positioned automatic weapons remain effective defensive tools. Individual determination still matters in combat. Tactical decisions made under pressure still shape outcomes. Adversaries still make assumptions based on incomplete information. These patterns persist across different wars, different weapons, different soldiers. The recounts action demonstrates that force ratios and numerical superiority do not always determine tactical outcomes. Terrain, weapons, training, and individual determination can offset numerical disadvantages. One soldier with the right weapon in the right position at the right time can matter more than 100 soldiers poorly positioned with inadequate weapons. This reality shapes modern military training and doctrine. Armies emphasize positioning, fields of fire, combined arms coordination, and individual initiative because these factors multiply combat power beyond simple numerical calculations. A small force, properly employed, can defeat a larger force that attacks carelessly or without proper reconnaissance.
The Germans at Recounts attacked with adequate force to overwhelm one machine gun position if they had known that was all they faced. 250 soldiers against one should be a quick victory, but they did not know. They assumed, based on their experience, that American defensive positions were stronger than they appeared. So they advanced cautiously, took casualties, pulled back, tried again. This caution consumed the 5 hours the Americans needed to demolish the bridge. That 5-hour delay changed the tactical situation. The Germans failed to achieve their objective. The American bridgehead was preserved. The 35th Division continued its advance. The war moved on. And Jake Lindsay, 19 years old from Kentucky, went from being an ammunition bearer who had never operated a machine gun in combat to being the soldier who stopped 250 Germans with 1,300 rounds and stubborn refusal to quit. Not because he was trying to be a hero, because leaving seemed more dangerous than staying, and he was too stubborn or too scared or too determined to die without fighting. That combination, stubbornness and fear and determination, kept a lot of soldiers alive in World War II. It won battles, it held positions, it changed outcomes. It still matters today. In every war, in every army, there are moments when individual soldiers face overwhelming odds and have to decide whether to fight or flee. Most flee. That is rational. Some fight. That is also rational if the calculation is that fleeing means death and fighting means maybe survival. Lindsay fought. He survived. 80 years later, his action reminds us that numbers do not always determine outcomes, and that ordinary soldiers doing what seems necessary at the moment can change history, even if they never intended to be heroes. The field outside Recounts is quiet now. Wheat grows where Germans died. Cars drive where the bridge once stood. And somewhere in archives, Morrison's after-action report still exists, documenting 5 hours when one American machine gun held back 250 German soldiers and preserved a bridgehead that helped end a war. Thank you for reading. If you found this story valuable, consider sharing it. History is full of forgotten stories like this, moments when individual determination shaped outcomes far beyond what anyone expected. These stories deserve to be remembered, studied, and understood, not to glorify war, but to understand the human dimension of conflict and the extraordinary things ordinary people sometimes do when circumstances demand it.